Would you mobsters, Miranda writes, courtroom drama, and that famous phrase, I plead the fifth, all have in common? They're actually tied to one of the most powerful and misunderstood protections in the United States Bill of Rights, the Fifth Amendment. But here's the thing. This amendment isn't just for criminals or high-profile trials. It's actually for you. It's your right to stay silent, your shield against self-incrimination. And in some cases, it's the only thing standing between you and a legal disaster. Today we're going to be diving into the history, the heart, and the modern-day battles surrounding the Fifth Amendment. Why did the founders fight so hard for it? How is it being used, and how is it being abused today? Hey y'all, and welcome back to Voices of Liberty. We are on episode 8 of this podcast, and that is just super exciting. Today we're going to be diving into the history, the heart, and the modern-day battles surrounding the Fifth Amendment. I am really excited to dig into this one. There is a lot that goes into this amendment. And I really encourage you to do your own research on top of this podcast episode because there's no way that I can cover everything in this one episode. I almost did it in multiple episodes like I did with the First Amendment, but I wanted to kind of just go ahead and get through the Bill of Rights, and I wanted to just go ahead and do this amendment. So I really hope that y'all do your own research on top of this because, again, there's just so much that goes into this amendment, and it's really hard to pack it all in one episode. But I'm going to try to do my best, and I'm going to give you all some Supreme Court cases that deal with it. That way you can kind of better understand it. You've probably heard it said on crime shows, I plead the fifth. But what does that actually mean? And why does it matter to you as a Christian, a citizen, and someone who values truth and liberty? The Fifth Amendment protects us from being forced to testify against ourselves, from double jeopardy, and from having our life, liberty, and property taken without due process. In short, it's basically just a guardrail against government overreach, which we talk about all the time on this podcast. And in today's world, that matters more than ever. But before we really dig into the Fifth Amendment, I want to go ahead and go over our weekly challenge and weekly verse because I love to start this podcast out on a positive note. And what I've also included for y'all is a printout for the weekly challenge and weekly verse so you can hang it on your refrigerator, your bathroom mirror, wherever you're going to see it. And that way you can continue to memorize the verse and then you can be reminded of the weekly challenge as well. I'll link that PDF in the show notes so you can go and check it out. But the weekly verse this week is, May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing, so that by the power of the Holy Spirit you may abound in hope. Romans 15:13. And then the weekly challenge this week is Defend Life Week. I want y'all to post or share one pro-life truth or testimony each day. And this is basically just to help educate others and stand for the unborn. I know my favorite scripture is speak for those who cannot speak for themselves in Proverbs 31. And it can be tough to speak up and share topics like this. I want y'all to be bold and just stand for truth. I know Live Action has many great posts you can share that are already made and created. And some of them are graphic. So I really do want y'all to kind of just keep that in mind when you're reviewing their content, that some of it is very graphic. But I don't think that we should shy away from viewing those images. I think it's very eye-opening. And I think that we really need to just have a grasp on what actually goes on with abortions and understand it. I think it's important to expose ourselves to the evil of abortion so that we are able to show others and continue to speak truth. Abortion is evil, y'all. And I just think that, the more we are bold about it and the more that we share, the more people are going to see. So just keep that in mind when you look at Live Action stuff. They are a little graphic and it might make you cry, but it's very important that you see what is happening to these little babies in the womb. And it's sickening. It's absolutely sickening. But I really want y'all to be bold this week and share truth. And maybe it's just one post. Maybe you don't have to do it every day. But maybe it's just one post and have the boldness to share. And I'll be praying for y'all to have that boldness because it is so important. And it can be very, very, risky posting something like that because, your family may not agree or you may have some pushback. But I will be praying for y'all and to have the boldness and to have the words to speak, because I really think that the Lord can speak through us, and I will be praying that he gives you all the words to speak when you do make these posts. And if you want to make the post, please tag me in it, because I will share it on our Instagram story. If you post a pro-life post this week, please tag me at the official CCW on Instagram or at the Voices of Liberty podcast. I would love to share on my Instagram story. I think that would be super cool. And just feel free to tag us and I will share it on our Instagram story. I think it's so important to continue to spread the word. Yeah, I'll be praying for y'all this week with this, because this is a more tougher challenge, but I really do think it's important to stand for truth and to have a boldness and confidence. That is the weekly challenge this week. Don't forget about the memory cards and then the weekly challenge cards that go along with it. I will have them ready to print out on the show notes, but I'm super excited and I really hope that y'all enjoy the challenge this week. Okay, y'all, let me tell you about my friends at 7 Weeks Coffee. 7 Weeks Coffee is America's pro-life coffee company on a mission to fund the pro-life movement one cup of coffee at a time. Why are they called 7 Weeks Coffee? Because at 7 weeks, a baby is the size of a little coffee bean, and it's the same time a heartbeat is clearly detected on an ultrasound. That is why they donate 10% of every sale to support pregnancy care centers across the country. They have raised over $800,000 for these centers and have saved thousands of lives. Now, let me tell you about the coffee, because I am very picky about what I put into my body. It's mold-free, pesticide-free, shade-grown, and low-acid, and it's organically farmed. It truly checks all the boxes. So go to 7weekscoffee.com and save 15% forever when you subscribe. Plus, exclusively for my listeners, use the code OFFICIALCCW for an extra 10% off your first order. That's a 25% total savings on your first order. Remember, your order will directly help support a network of over 1,000 pro-life organizations across the U.S. Before we really dig into the meat of the Fifth Amendment, I always want to give a refresher of the amendments we've already gone through, because I feel like the more that you hear it and the more that you listen to it and just are around it and exposed to it, the more you will be able to memorize it and take it to heart. So the First Amendment is, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. The Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The Third Amendment. No soldier shall, in time of peace, be quartered in any house, without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by the law. The Fourth Amendment. We did this one last week. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. That's a lot. But again, the more you familiarize yourself with these amendments and the more you hear them, the better you will be able to memorize them and take them to heart. Now we're going to be digging into the Fifth Amendment. And here's the Fifth Amendment. It's long, y'all, so just be prepared. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime, unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia, when in the actual service in time of war or public danger. Nor shall any person be subject to the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without the due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. So I want y'all to just breathe and relax. I know there's a lot in here, and I won't even probably scratch the surface today of what everything in this amendment is and means, but I'm going to try to do my best to basically summarize it and explain the main key points, because there are 5 key points that I want y'all to take from this amendment, and I want y'all to take those key points and just kind of lock them in your memory And then I'm going to give y'all some court cases. Actually, I'm going to be talking about a case at the very end of this podcast that is more recent, and it's actually one that's currently going on right now, so we don't have a lot of the details yet, but I wanted to tie it into this episode because it's very important, and this has been a trending news topic this week, and I always think it's cool to tie in something that's going on in the news right now to what we're going through in the Bill of Rights. So before we really just dig into the court cases, I want to kind of give a brief history and talk about those 5 key points. So what is neat about all of these amendments within the Bill of Rights is there is always a history behind the amendment. There is always a why that drove James Madison to write the amendments that he wrote. For example, with the 5th Amendment, we have protection against double jeopardy. But in England, you could be tried for the same crime twice. So if you're not familiar with the double jeopardy, so what happened was basically in England, you could be tried for the same crime twice. In America, James Madison realized that that was against the rights of Americans, and he wanted to protect that from happening. If you were found not guilty in the first trial, they could turn around and try you again in England, and you could be found guilty. So James Madison realized that this was clearly a violation of Americans' rights, and he wanted to ensure that it was protected in the 5th Amendment. So, again, even if you were not found guilty the first time, in England, you could be tried and found guilty the second time. So there's just, it's wrong, y'all. It's clearly wrong. And so James Madison wanted to ensure that our right was protected. So here are the 5 main terms that I want to mention when it comes to dissecting the 5th Amendment. And in this amendment alone, it discusses a grand jury, protection against double jeopardy, which we just talked about, protection against self-incrimination, due process of law, taking of private property. Again, all these terms deal with the 5th Amendment. Like with all the other episodes, I want to give a brief breakdown of the history behind the 5th Amendment, but each specific term does have an in-depth history, and so I really encourage y'all to do your own research when it comes to that, because I'm going to try to give a brief summary of it. This podcast episode would take forever if I tried to dive into every little thing. And I wanted to kind of summarize all of this in one podcast episode. So I plan to give you guys examples of court cases that deal with the 5th Amendment. And like I said, one of these is actually recent. So I want y'all to kind of just do what we did last time and just take a second and pause the podcast and see if you can kind of figure out how you think the Supreme Court ruled in that situation. So I want to start with the grand jury. The grand jury essentially originated in Athens, Greece, which was obviously a very, very long time ago, and it was used during medieval England. And it's also used in the American colonies, and we still have a grand jury today. According to countyofmerced.com, it says, there is evidence that the courts of that time summoned a body of sworn neighbors to present crimes that had come to their knowledge. Since the members of that accusing jury were selected from small jurisdictions, it was natural that they could present accusations based on their personal knowledge. So I was talking about during the time of England, and that article specifically talks about the history of a grand jury. The jury is there to basically provide a fair method of instituting criminal proceedings against persons believed to have committed crimes. I want to read another section from tile.loc.gov, and it says, the grand jury is an English institution, brought to this country by the early colonists and incorporated in the Constitution by the founders. There is every reason to believe that our constitutional grand jury was intended to operate substantially like its English progenitor. The basic purpose of the English grand jury was to provide a fair method for instituting criminal proceedings against persons believed to have committed crimes. Grand jurors were selected from the body of people, and their work was not hampered by rigid procedural or evidential rules. In fact, grand jurors could act on their own knowledge and were free to make their own presentments or indictments on such information as they deemed satisfactory. Despite its broad power to institute criminal proceedings, the grand jury grew in popular favor with the years. It acquired an independence in England free from control of the crown or judges. Its adoption in our Constitution as the sole method for preferring charges in serious crimes, in serious criminal cases, shows the high place it held in instrument of justice. And in this country, as in England, of the old grand jury has conveyed as a body of laymen, free from technical rules, acting in secret, pledged to indict no one because of prejudice and to free no one because of special favor. The jury is there to help offer a fair trial, y'all. Random citizens can just be summoned to jury duty. I know my husband has been before. I don't think he actually ended up having to go. They sent him home when he got there. But he has been summoned, and my mom, I think, has done it a few times as well. But a jury is able to give an independent view of a case, and that is why they are used so often. The jury will review facts of the case and evidence. Typically, this is done in secret proceedings to maintain privacy, and they look at the evidence involved, and then they determine if there is probable cause to indict the individual. We talked about this a little bit last week in the Fourth Amendment. Probable cause is a requirement found in the Fourth Amendment that must usually be met before police make an arrest, conduct a search, or receive a warrant. Courts usually find probable cause when there is a reasonable basis for believing that a crime may have been committed for an arrest, or when evidence of the crime is present in the case to be searched for a search. Under exigent circumstances, these situations involve an immediate threat to someone's safety, potential destruction of evidence, or a fleeing suspect. Probable cause can also justify a warrantless search or seizure. Persons arrested without a warrant are required to be brought before competent authority shortly after the arrest for a prompt judicial determination of probable cause. So we did talk about that a little bit last week in the last episode. If you want to go listen to it, I do believe I did mention a court case that kind of dealt with probable cause. But something I want you guys to remember is that even though someone has been taken into custody, they are innocent until proven guilty. I also want to just point out that because you are accused of committing a crime, it does not mean that you lose your rights as Americans. And I think sometimes we can tend to forget that because, we get angry and we, have all these emotions when someone does something wrong, and we think that they automatically should just lose everything. But that's not actually true. They still have rights just like you and I do. So having a jury ensures that the trial is fair. Okay, we're going to take a little pause for a second so I can tell you about the Anastasia Co. The Anastasia Co. is a clothing, stationery, and gift brand on a mission to share truth and encouragement through thoughtfully designed products. In their shop, you'll find beautiful shirts, hats, journals, wall art, stickers, and so much more. To shop, visit shop.theanastasiaco.com. If you use the code CCWives10, it will get you 10% off your order. I own her Coffee Plus Kingdom Work hat and her planner, and I always get so many compliments on the hat. And I use the planner a lot when prepping for this podcast. It helps keep me organized and just stay on track. So again, if you go get yours today at shop.theanastasiaco.com, code CCWives10 to get 10% off your order. Now, I want y'all to imagine being charged with a crime and being found not guilty. However, what if someone tried to charge you again for that same crime? We talked about this earlier at the beginning of this section, but this is protection against double jeopardy. This protects you from being charged with the same crime twice, which is what they did in England, and you could literally be charged for the same crime twice, even if you were found to be not guilty. According to tanfaline.com, it says, the English law preserved the double jeopardy rule for over 800 years. Y'all, they had this law for over 800 years. The rule was partially abolished in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland by the Criminal Justice Act of 2003. In certain, very limited circumstances, a person who was acquitted of a crime can now be investigated and put on trial one more time. Wow. Wow. James Madison knew this was a violation of rights when he was framing and writing the Bill of Rights, and ensured that even those who have been charged with crimes also have rights. If you were found not guilty in America, you cannot be charged with that same crime again under the same charges because of the protection against double jeopardy. So if you're found not guilty, they cannot come around and charge you again with that same crime for the same thing unless it's a separate case, unless you did it again or whatever the case is. But they can't go back and open up that case and say, hey, we're gonna try you again and we're gonna charge you. This specific term goes way back in history, But James Madison ensured that it was written in the Bill of Rights. He understood when England overstepped, and he wanted to ensure that America did not make the same mistakes that England did. He did, however, receive some backlash from the House of Representatives when it came to the section of the Fifth Amendment. Here was their thinking. Opposition in the House proceeded on the proposition that the language could be construed to prohibit a second trial after a successful appeal by a defendant, and would therefore either constitute a hazard to the public by freeing the guilty, or more likely result in a detriment to defendants because of appellate courts would be loath to reverse convictions if no new trial could follow. But a motion to strike or trial from the clause failed. As approved by the Senate, however, and accepted by the House for referral to the states, the present language of the clause was inserted. And that is from lawcornell.edu. So now we're going to be discussing protection against self-incrimination, or better known as I plead the Fifth. This clause in the Fifth Amendment essentially just prevents you from being forced to admit to something that you did not do. I want to read this section, and it says, "The court has settled upon the principle that the clause serves two interrelated interests: the preservation of an accusatorial system of criminal justice, which goes back to the integrity of the judicial system, and the preservation of personal privacy from unwarranted governmental intrusion. The basic purposes that lie behind the privilege against self-incrimination do not relate to protecting the innocent from conviction, but rather to preserving the integrity of a judicial system in which even the guilty are not to be convicted unless the prosecution shoulders the entire load. The basic purpose of a trial is a determination of truth, and it is self-evident that to deny a lawyer's help through the technical intricacies of a criminal trial, or deny a full opportunity to appeal conviction because the accused is poor, is to impede that purpose and to infect a criminal proceeding with the clear danger of convicting the innocent. By contrast, the Fifth Amendment's privilege against self-incrimination is not adjunct to the ascertainment of truth. That privilege, like the guarantees of the Fourth Amendment, stands as protection of quite different constitutional values reflecting the concern of our society for the right of each individual to be let alone." So, I want to talk about that a little bit too. That basically just breaks down the I plead the Fifth section. And what they're basically saying is that even though you are poor, you may not have money for a lawyer, you still have a right to a lawyer. And when people say I plead the Fifth, they're basically talking about the Fifth Amendment. So essentially what this article is saying is that you have a right to a lawyer. And when they say I plead the Fifth, they're basically saying that they don't want to say anything that could further incriminate themselves. They want to remain silent. And they have every right to do that. When people say that they are pleading the Fifth, they're referencing the Fifth Amendment, obviously. This is the protection against self-incrimination. So you don't want to further self-incriminate, so you want a lawyer. Basically, you want to remain silent. Due process of law is the next one, and it just means that everyone is treated fairly. Everyone should be treated and tried the same. Within the American legal system, one of the cornerstones is that everyone has the right to be treated equally under the law. It is important that laws created by representatives of the people are applied equally by a neutral third party. Lastly, taking of private property is the final one I want to mention. This amendment prevents the government from taking property that is not theirs without proper compensation. However, the Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution stipulates, "Nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation." Thus, whenever the United States acquires a property through eminent domain, it has a constitutional responsibility to justly compensate the property owner for their fair market value of their property. And if you want to kind of investigate that a little bit further, you can look at the court case Bauman v. Ross. That is from justice.gov. And basically what this is saying is, have you ever, seen construction happen on the highway? And there's all these houses, on the side of the road, and you're probably wondering, okay, so they're going to widen this road and they're just going to take these people's land? Like, how does that work? And basically what they do is they say, hey, we need your land for this highway to expand it, and we want to compensate you. They have to give you a fair market value for that property. You can decline all you want to, but you still have to give it over to them. They have to pay you, essentially, for that. So there's a lot that goes into that, too, and if you want to see more, you can look at the court case Ballin v. Ross. But the court case I want to talk about is Miranda v. Arizona. And I want to discuss this court case in particular because when I was talking about this at the beginning, I referenced the Miranda rights. And I briefly mentioned it at the beginning, and this is the case I kind of want to talk about, and this is where it originated from. In March of 1963, Ernesto Miranda was arrested with charges of rape and kidnapping, which are horrible, horrible charges. He was not informed of his Fifth Amendment rights and eventually pleaded guilty after an extremely long interrogation. So the police used tons of different interrogation tactics and interrogated him nonstop for 2 hours, basically pushing him to plead guilty. The police interrogated him for 2 hours and finally got a written confession from him and used this confession in court against him. The defense attorney pleaded for this evidence to not be submitted as the police had failed to even inform Miranda of his rights, which they have to inform you of your rights. At the trial, the jury did find him guilty. In this situation, how do you think the Supreme Court should have ruled? Because Miranda was not made aware of his rights, do you think that should have changed the case in any way? Is it okay for police to not inform Miranda of his rights? How do you think that the Supreme Court should have ruled in this situation? So I want to read the details of this case more specifically from oyez.com. And I kind of just gave y'all a brief summary of it, but I want to read the details because there is more in this, and I think it's important that we kind of have the whole picture. This case represents the consolidation of 4 cases, in each of which the defendant confessed guilt after being subjected to a variety of interrogation tactics and techniques without being informed of his Fifth Amendment rights during the interrogation. On March 13th, 1963, Ernesto Miranda was arrested in his house and brought to the police station where he was questioned by police officers in connection with the kidnapping and rape. After 2 hours of interrogation, the police obtained the written confession from Miranda. The written confession was admitted into evidence at trial despite objection of the defense attorney, and the fact that the police officers admitted they had not advised Miranda of his right to have an attorney present during the interrogation. The jury found Miranda guilty. On appeal, the Supreme Court of Arizona affirmed and held that Miranda's constitutional rights were not violated because he did not specifically request counsel. This went to the Supreme Court. If you go to oyez.com, they have the facts of the case, the main question, and then the conclusion. And I really like to look at that because it puts it into an easier way for me to look at and view. But the question is, does the Fifth Amendment's protection against self-incrimination extend to the police interrogation of a suspect? So I'm going to read the conclusion, and it says, the Fifth Amendment requires that law enforcement officials advise suspects of their right to remain silent and to obtain an attorney during interrogations while in police custody. Chief Justice Earl Warren delivered the opinion of the 5-4 majority, concluding that the defendant's interrogation violated the Fifth Amendment. To protect the privilege, the court reasoned procedural safeguards were required. A defendant was required to be warned before questioning that he had the right to remain silent, and that anything he said can be used against him in the court of law. A defendant was required to be told that he had the right to an attorney, and if he could not afford an attorney, one was to be appointed for him prior to any questioning if he so desired. So again, this goes back to what we were talking about earlier. If you don't have a lot of money, you can't afford an attorney, you still can be appointed an attorney even if you don't have enough money for one. After these warnings were given, a defendant could knowingly and intelligently waive these rights and to agree to answer questions or make a statement. Evidence obtained as a result of the interrogation was not to be used against a defendant at a trial unless the prosecution demonstrated the warnings were given and knowingly and intelligently waived. In this article further, it says, Justice Tom C. Clark wrote a dissenting opinion in which he argued that the majority's opinion created an unnecessarily strict interpretation of the Fifth Amendment that curtails the ability of the police to effectively execute their duties. He wrote that the state should have the burden to prove that the suspect was aware of his rights during the interrogation, but that the statements resulting from the interrogation should not be automatically excluded if the suspect was not explicitly informed of his rights. Justice John M. Harlan wrote that the judicial precedent and legislative history surrounding the Fifth Amendment does not support the view that the Fifth Amendment prohibits all pressure on the suspect. He also argued that there was no legal precedent to support the requirement to specifically inform suspects of their rights. Justice Potter Stewart and Byron R. White joined in the dissent, but it was a 5-4 majority in the Supreme Court, and they did conclude that the defendant's interrogation violated the Fifth Amendment. I always remember watching the show Cops with my parents. We still watch it today. And they always say to the person that they're arresting that they have a right to remain silent and that anything that they say can be used against them in court of law. And they have, the right to an attorney. If they can't afford an attorney, they are to be appointed one. I remember watching the show Cops, and I would hear that a lot. But at the time, I just really didn't understand why they even said that. I thought it was kind of silly. But clearly, there's a purpose. And I think it's important that even if you think that Miranda was guilty, which he probably was, he still has rights. It is important to note that they concluded, it was a 5-4 majority, that the defendant's interrogation violated the Fifth Amendment. Miranda should have been made aware of his rights, and he was not. So they had to take all of that into consideration. I kind of wanted to give some examples of how you can exercise your right to remain silent if you're ever in a situation where you have to. And this comes from justia.com. But I think it's important that I kind of just give y'all some examples so you can better understand. But it might come in handy because you never know when you might need it. I am exercising my right to remain silent. That one's pretty basic, pretty straightforward. I will not speak until I talk with my attorney. That one's also pretty straightforward. I am invoking my Miranda rights. Wow. Okay. So when you say I'm invoking my Miranda rights, you're essentially saying I want to remain silent until I have an attorney. So when you hear Miranda rights, that's what it's referring to, and it originated from the court case that we just talked about. So next case I want to mention is Dickerson v. United States. And this happened in 2000, so it's pretty recent. Essentially, a man named Charles Dickerson was the getaway driver of a robbery. However, the FBI and others stated that he was made aware of his Miranda rights, which came from the last case I just discussed. Dickerson said that he was not made aware of his Miranda rights until after he gave his statement. With that information, do you think that this was wrong? How do you think the Supreme Court should have ruled? I'm going to read this from oyeasy.com. Again, the more detailed facts of the case in the conclusion. And it says, during questioning about a robbery he was connected to, Charles Dickerson made statements to authorities admitting that he was a getaway driver in a series of bank robberies. Dickerson was then placed under arrest. The timing of his statement is disputed. The FBI and local detectives testified that Dickerson was advised of his Miranda rights, established in Miranda v. Arizona, which we just discussed that case, and waived them before he had made a statement. Dickerson said he was not read his Miranda warnings until after he gave his statement. After his indictment for bank robbery, Dickerson filed a motion to suppress the statement that he made on the ground that he had not received Miranda warnings before being interrogated. The government argued that even if Miranda warnings were not read, the statement was voluntary and therefore admissible under 18 U.S.C. Section 3501, which provides that a confession shall be admissible in evidence if it is voluntarily given. The district court granted Dickerson's motion, finding that he had not been read his Miranda rights or signed a waiver until after he made a statement. But the court did not address Section 3501. In reversing, the Court of Appeals acknowledged that Dickerson had not received Miranda warnings, but held that Section 3501 was satisfied because his statement was voluntary. So he voluntarily told them that he was involved and he was the getaway driver in these bank robberies. The court held that the Congress enacted Section 3501 with the express purpose of legislatively overruling Miranda and restoring voluntariness as a test for admitting confessions in the federal court. So the question is, may Congress legislatively overrule Miranda v. Arizona and its warnings that govern the admissibility of statements made during the custodial interrogation? Dickerson said he was not made aware of his rights until after he gave his statement, which basically he was saying, I was a getaway driver in these robberies. But the FBI and the police said he was read his Miranda rights before his statement. Anyway, this went to the Supreme Court, and in a 7-2 opinion delivered by Chief Justice William H. Rehnquist, the court held that Miranda governs the admissibility of statements made during the custodial interrogation in both state and federal courts. He said, Miranda has become embedded in routine police practice to the point where the warnings have become part of our national culture, wrote Rehnquist. Miranda announced a constitutional rule that Congress may not supersede legislatively. We decline to overrule Miranda ourselves, concluded Chief Justice. So, basically, the court ruled in favor of Dickerson. They said because he wasn't read his, Miranda rights before his statement, we're going to side with him. They're basically trying to figure out if Congress could legislatively overrule Miranda v. Arizona. And remember, Miranda is the thing that kind of set the tone for everything else. So, when you're watching the show Cops, or you actually get arrested or whatever, you are read your Miranda rights or your Miranda warnings. So this is what Chief Justice William H. Rehnquist was saying, was that it has become embedded in routine police practice to the point where warnings have become part of our national culture. They ruled in favor of Dickerson in a 7-2 majority. And they decided to not overrule Miranda v. Arizona, which was the case we talked about earlier. And they decided that people should still be made aware of their rights and be read their Miranda warnings before they give their statements and when they're arrested. Okay, y'all, let me tell you about my friends at Conviction Co. Conviction Co. is a family-owned business started by a Midwest stay-at-home mom. Their goal is to provide their customers with high-quality and on-trend apparel and accessories that make it easy to boldly share truth and spark important conversations. I own 2 of their hats, and they are the best quality hats. I own the trucker hats. One says One Nation Under God, and the other one says Make America Healthy Again. I had my husband trying them on, my dad trying them on, my cousin trying them on, and my grandma actually bought some of the hats. So that just shows how they really speak to people. They catch people's attention, and it's a way for you to boldly share your faith, but make it fashionable. So go to convictioncode.com and use the code OfficialCCW to get 10% off your order. Again, that's convictioncode.com. Use code OfficialCCW to get 10% off your order today. Y'all, this is why we need to be aware of our rights. We need to know them and have them memorized. So, again, we need to have all of these things memorized, y'all. It's going to be so beneficial for us in the long run if we do. And I know it can be a lot. You don't have to memorize the Bill of Rights and all these amendments word for word. It's great if you can. I admire that a lot. And I'm trying to do that right now, but it's really hard, especially with one like this where there's so much information involved. But we need to have them memorized, y'all, because the government can overstep. They can make mistakes. And if we're not careful, they can infringe on our rights. Even if you have allegedly committed a crime, you still have rights. You still have to be read your Miranda rights. You still have these rights. And so it's essential that we know these. Because if not, obviously, the government can infringe on that. So the next case I want to talk about is very, very recent. This is actually going on in the news right now, and it's been trending for the past week. I didn't really know much about it until probably a couple days ago, and I really started to just dig into it more. But I want to talk about the heartbreaking story of Austin Metcalf, and this has been all over social media and the news headlines lately. And honestly, it's not hard to see why. It's absolutely devastating, and it's a reminder of how fragile life is in general. There's just been a lot of noise around this case, conflicting reports, speculation, even political takes. And today I just want to cut through that. I want to bring clarity, compassion, and prayerful perspective to the situation. But first and foremost, my heart goes out to the families involved, especially Austin's parents and his twin brother. Their world has changed forever, y'all. And I pray that they find strength and peace in Christ. And if they don't yet know him, I pray that even through this unthinkable tragedy, they would be drawn to his comfort and saving grace. I also want to lift up Karmelo Anthony and his family in prayer, even though he is the one who committed the crime. I pray that the truth would come to light and that justice would be pursued, and that the hearts would be opened to repentance and healing. But before we go there, I think we have to pause and just consider the grief and the trauma and the deep loss Austin's family is feeling right now. And please, please, y'all, continue to keep them in your prayers. I cannot imagine what they're going through. And it is just such a horrible, horrible thing. So I kind of want to just briefly go through this case. I wrote a blog post about this actually yesterday. I'm going to go off my blog post that I made when it comes to this story because I just wrote this and it's pretty fresh. And if you want to actually go to the blog post and read it yourself, I'll link it in the show notes. But it says, at a Texas high school track meet, Austin Metcalf, a white male, was tragically stabbed in the heart and killed. The suspect is the 17-year-old Karmelo Anthony, a black male. Reports say that confrontation began when Karmelo sat under the wrong team's tent. Austin asked him to move, and in response, Karmelo allegedly turned around and stabbed him. Austin died in the arms of his twin brother. This should break anyone's heart, y'all, and this is why I said we need to be praying for their family. Let me be clear. Just because you may not like what someone says, it is not an excuse to resort to violence. Actions have consequences regardless of your race, gender, or background. And the situation is the same. You cannot resort to violence just because you don't like what someone says. If someone says to move, that doesn't mean you get to stab them in the heart. That doesn't mean you have to self-defend and hurt someone. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're black, white, Asian, Indian, Native American. I don't care. You cannot hurt someone else just because you don't like what they say. We may never know exactly what was said between Austin and Karmelo. Reports suggest that they had never even met before. While it's confirmed that Austin asked Karmelo to move, what followed remains disputed. I want to point out that Karmelo also said that he was self-defending again. According to an affidavit obtained by the Austin American-Statesman, Karmelo turned himself in shortly after the stabbing. His words to Officer Eduardo Cortez were telling. "I was protecting myself," Anthony allegedly said, unprompted as the officer instructed him to raise his hands. "I'm not alleged I did it," he added, according to the affidavit. The affidavit also states Karmelo was emotional and crying hysterically while being taken into custody. He reportedly said, "He put his hands on me. I told him not to," and asked, "Is he going to be okay?" Later, he inquired if what he did would be considered self-defense. So, he was saying that he told Austin not to put his hands on him, and Austin did. Well, yeah, Austin may have touched him. That doesn't mean that Austin punched him or incited violence on him. Just because someone touches you doesn't mean that you can stab them. Anyway, so I went and looked, and I'm going off my blog post for this because this is kind of off the fly. I'm just kind of talking about this, but I went and looked at the Texas law when it came to self-defense. And this is what it says. According to Texas criminal defense law, individuals can use force, including deadly force, if they reasonably believe it's necessary to protect themselves or others from crimes such as sexual assault, robbery, or murder. However, the force must be proportional to the threat. And that comes from sharpcriminalattorney.com. So, it has to be a serious threat. It can't just be someone touching you just because you don't like what they say, and you say, touch me again, and see what happens, and they touch you, and then you stab them. If all Austin did was put his hand on Karmelo to ask him to move, the self-defense claim may not hold up in court. Deadly force in response to a minimal physical contact is likely to be considered excessive under the law in Texas. In fact, Karmelo could face serious consequences regardless of his emotional state or later remorse. So Anthony Karmelo was actually placed under a $1 million bond, which has now been reduced to $250,000. And I don't have the exact link for this. I keep seeing it on social media. But apparently his bond was lowered because the family was begging to have it lowered for financial reasons. They have a GoFundMe for Austin Metcalf, and they also have a GoFundMe for Karmelo Anthony. And what's crazy is that Karmelo Anthony has actually raised more money than Austin Metcalf. And Austin Metcalf's family is the one having to bury their son. They're having to bury their son, y'all. And yet, Karmelo Anthony has raised way more money than Austin Metcalf has, or his family has, for him to pay for the expenses. And Anthony is going to use his to hire an attorney or whatever he needs. But what just came out today, I think today, from the New York Post, and basically it says Karmelo Anthony, living with family in $900,000 home in gated community, bought a new car after his release on bond in the Austin Metcalf murder case. Oh my gosh. So there's so much that goes into this case, and I obviously there's more and more information's coming out, but it is really hard to set aside your own feelings when it comes to discussing cases like this, because obviously there was wrong, and in a way I did feel sympathy for Karmelo Anthony, because yeah, maybe he did feel like he was doing it out of self-defense, but why do you have a knife at school? I don't know if he was planning on hurting someone or if it was just a freak thing, and I don't know if he was easily provoked to anger and made a rash decision, or if he was planning this, or what the case was. And I did feel sympathy for him at first, because it said in the article that I read that he was clearly upset, but I think it was more of he was upset because he knew he was going to be in trouble versus, oh, I did something wrong, I hurt him, I killed him. So I think that is maybe where I'm kind of leaning towards this case. But at the center of the tragic death of Austin Metcalf lies not just grief and outrage, but a legal battle that will be shaped by constitutional rights, especially the Fifth Amendment. Why? Because whether you're guilty or innocent, your right not to testify against yourself is protected. That means Karmelo Anthony doesn't have to say a word in his own defense. He can remain silent in court, and that silence can't be used against him. It definitely is hard to watch, especially when you see his family buying expensive cars and houses with money that's been donated or whatever. I'm not really sure. I just know that this is the current situation, and a lot of people are outraged. It's hard not to feel anger when you see that. He has raised more money than Austin's family, and they are the ones who have to bury their son. But here's the hard part. For a grieving family, for a watching public, and for anyone who sees this story in the headlines, that silence can feel like injustice. The Fifth Amendment is designed to protect the accused from being forced to confess. But in an emotionally charged cases like this, it often feels like it's protecting the wrong person. While it feels like this, I have high hopes that justice will be served. The Lord is just, and even if Anthony seems to get away with this crime on earth, again, the Lord is just, and we have to trust that. I want to read y'all this scripture from Deuteronomy 32:35, and it says, "Vengeance is mine, and recompense, for the time when their foot shall slip, for the day of their calamity at hand, and their doom comes swiftly." Vengeance is mine, declares the Lord, y'all, and it is in his hands. No matter what happens, it's all in his hands, and we have to trust that. Again, this is an ongoing case, and like I said, this information just came out today about the house and the car. So more and more information is just being released daily. And while silence can seem like it's protecting Anthony, he still has rights, even though he allegedly committed a murder. So we have to remember that. Maybe Anthony was genuinely upset because he didn't mean to kill Metcalf. But he did. And you cannot take that back. And after I've seen the things that he's said and the actions he's taken since then, it just doesn't seem like genuine sorrow. And so I've just really had to wrestle with that and just, pray that the Lord works in his heart and that he is saved, because this is a really, really tough case. And I pray that justice is served, and I pray that Austin Metcalf's family gets the justice that they deserve, because nothing will ever bring their son back. That's a wrap on this episode of Voices of Liberty. We've uncovered the power and the purpose of the Fifth Amendment. We've seen how our rights remain silent, to be protected from unjust accusations, and to keep what's rightfully ours without the government interference. All trace back to a foundational truth. We are created in the image of God, and that means we are not to be trampled, silenced, or stripped of justice. The Fifth Amendment isn't just courtroom drama. It's a daily reminder that our rights come from God, not government. As believers, we're called not only to know our rights, but to protect them, speak truth, and stand in the gap for those who can't. If this episode encouraged you or opened your eyes, please share it with one of your friends. Just one friend, that's all I ask. And if you send me proof that you sent it to one friend at voicesoflibertycontact@gmail.com, I will give you a shout out on the podcast, the website, and send you an exclusive CCW sticker while supplies last. I love it when y'all share. I'll even share it on our Instagram story. I really, really love it when y'all share. So please continue to do that. And subscribe if you feel led to. And if you feel led to leave a review, please do. It means the world to me. Don't forget about the weekly challenge download and the weekly verse download. And please, y'all, please pray in prayer for Austin's family. This is a horrible, horrible situation, and I cannot imagine what they're going through. But it's important that we remember to pray for them. I appreciate every single one of y'all. So just remember to stay bold, have grace, stay grounded in truth, and never stop standing for liberty.